The F-14 Tomcat is one of the most studied and talked about planes in the world. There are some very well-versed videos out there covering the hard details of the Tomcat's capabilities and engineering accomplishments, but I really want to look into what made it such a cultural icon. Today, we're looking into the origins and impact of the F-14 Tomcat, the most famous fighter in history. To really grasp the importance of why the Tomcat was such an important aviation icon, we have to dial the clock back to its origins. The story began with an ambitious but ultimately flawed predecessor, the F-111B. In the early 1960s, the US Department of Defense, under Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, sought to develop a common fighter for both the Air Force and the Navy. This initiative, known as the Tactical Fighter Experimental or TFX program, aimed to reduce costs and increase efficiency by creating a single airframe that could meet the demands of both services. In the 1960s, there was an issue regarding landing speeds for military aircraft. Prior to World War II, planes were equipped with straight wings which offered tight turning and slow, manageable landing speeds. Straight wings run into the problem of inhibiting high speed, however. If you were to try to approach, say, the speed of sound, a straight wing is effectively a barn door on your plane. German aerospace engineer Adolf Bussmann discovered in the 1930s that sweeping the wing back would cut down on drag, thus allowing higher speeds. Throughout the 1950s, you began to see a plethora of tactical aircraft equipped with swept wings. But with the swept wing comes a reduction in low-speed handling. The F-100 Super Sabre in particular was a nightmare to handle when flying slow. Something you need for, landing. As a result, landing speeds increased, and with that comes the need to extend runways out. For the US Air Force, this wasn't too much of a problem, but you can only extend an aircraft carrier deck so far. Even the new Forrestal-class aircraft carriers were challenging boats to land for FJ Fury and F-7U Cutlass pilots, the latter of which had an especially poor power plant coupled with poor low-speed handling. The Cutlass was quickly branded the Ensign Eater or Ensign Eliminator depending on who you talk to. A few years later, to get back to the TFX program, the designers would have to design an aircraft with good low-speed and high-speed handling to cover all theaters of operation it would be in. The solution came in the form of variable geometry. Basically, a hinged wing that would sweep back for high speed and straighten out for low speed. The resulting aircraft, the F-111, was designed as a supersonic, variable sweep wing aircraft that was capable of multiple roles, including long-range interception for the Navy. The Air Force's F-111 variants would go on to be damned good bombers, serving for almost 40 years. While it never received an official nickname, it was commonly referred to as the Aardvark. Another prominent and rarely covered variant was the EF-111 Raven, nicknamed the Sparkvark. This was a vital electronic warfare asset that jammed the hell out of Iraqi SAM radars during the Gulf War. All in all, great plane. Australia only just retired theirs pretty recently in 2010. Oh god. 2010 was 15 years ago. The Navy's variant, the F-111B, was intended to provide fleet defense with advanced radar systems and long-range missiles. I talked about this a bit in my F-4 video, but the F-111B's job was going to be a far cry from the dogfighting carrier fighters of World War II. After the Second World War, the clear and primary threats to a carrier task force were maritime patrol bombers like the Tu-95 Bear or Tu-16 Badger. Sure, they could carry bombs, but their real manner of attacking an American carrier would be long-range anti-ship missiles. Over time, the anti-ship missiles evolved from simple Mach 2 designs like the AS-3 Kangaroo to the long-range Mach 3 capable AS-4 Kitchen. The F-111B's duty would be to engage the bombers as well as any already launched cruise missiles before the fleet could be hit. For this, a pair of Pratt & Whitney TF-30 turbofans would drive the interceptor to Mach 2 at an altitude of above 50,000 feet. Once aloft, the B would search out an enemy formation with a powerful AUG-9 radar suite and lob the massive AIM-54 Phoenix missile up to 80 miles away. The AUG-9 was an absolute powerhouse of a radar. The radar and its partner in crime, the AIM-54 Phoenix missile, had risen from the ashes of the ASG-18 and AIM-47 Super Falcon designed for the ill-fated F-108 Rapier and YF-12 Blackbird. While the Air Force initially passed on the expensive and complex system, the Navy saw it as a great fleet defense tool for the F-111B. The AUG-9 had a ridiculous range for the day, and in ideal conditions could track 24 air contacts at over 200 miles. The brain and heart of the F-111B were excellent, but the body would be its downfall. Despite the swing wing offering better low-speed handling, the F-111B was just way too heavy to operate effectively from aircraft carriers. Visibility was also an issue as the pilot couldn't see too well over the nose, something you really need to have a handle on if you're taxiing on a pitching deck. By 1968, the program had become a political and financial quagmire. Mounting cost and technical setbacks combined with pressure from the Navy led to the cancellation of the F-111B. It seemed a true inter-service fighter design would have to wait a few decades. The failure of the F-111B highlighted the need for a dedicated naval fighter. The Navy launched the Naval Fighter Experimental, or VFX, program in 1968. The new fighter needed to be capable of fleet defense, but also had a dogfight up close. The experiences from Vietnam showed that close-in knife fights were far from over, and the Soviet Union was developing a new generation of fighters that would surely escort their bombers. Ling Temco Vought, General Dynamics, Republic, and McDonnell Douglas all submitted proposals for the VFX program, but one company would stand out among the rest. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation emerged as the frontrunner of the competition, leveraging its extensive experience in naval aviation. Grumman's 303 design promised to address the shortcomings of the F-111B. The company incorporated advanced features, reused the AUG-9 and Phoenix combination, and the variable geometry concept along with the TF-30 engine. Design 303 would save weight by carrying the Phoenix missiles not in an internal weapons bay, but in a so-called gutter running between the two TF-30s. Initially, the design was to have a single vertical stabilizer, but a second was incorporated to improve lateral stability as well as allow the tails to be shorter than a single large design. Gotta save on that carrier hangar space. In addition to the Phoenix, the Tomcat could carry the standard array of Sidewinder and Sparrow missiles. Finally, the M61 Vulcan cannon was fitted to the port side of the nose if all other options were expended. The Navy awarded Grumman the contract in January 1969, and the designation of the new fighter was finalized as F-14. As tradition for all Grumman fighters, the F-14 was named for a cat, this time referencing the VFX project manager, Admiral Tom Connolly. Thus was born the Tomcat. On December 21, 1970, the first F-14A prototype took to the skies from Grumman's facility in Calverton, New York. Early test flights revealed areas for improvement, but they also validated key aspects of the design, such as the variable sweep wings and avionics systems. Grumman conducted extensive testing to ensure the F-14 met the Navy's rigorous requirements. Carrier trials proved the Tomcat's ability to operate from aircraft carriers, addressing a critical shortcoming of the F-111B. VF-1 Wolfpack and VF-2 Bounty Hunters were established on October 14, 1972 at Naval Air Station Miramar, California, specifically to operate the new F-14. The two squadrons began training in the aircraft in late 1973, focusing on mastering the Tomcat's complex systems, such as the AN AUG-9 radar and AIM-54 Phoenix. By 1974, VF-1 and 2 were declared operational and prepared for their first deployment on the USS Enterprise. Many don't know this, but the F-14 did fly over the skies of Vietnam. The F-14 saw its first operational deployment during Operation Frequent Wind, the final phase of the evacuation of Saigon in April 1975. As North Vietnamese forces closed in on the city, the US orchestrated a massive evacuation effort to extract American personnel and at-risk Vietnamese citizens. The F-14 played a critical role in providing air cover for the operation. Operating from the Enterprise, Tomcats patrolled the skies, ensuring the safety of helicopters ferrying refugees from Saigon to US Navy ships in the South China Sea. The F-14's long-range radar and weapons systems proved invaluable in maintaining situational awareness and deterring potential threats, although no direct engagements occurred during the operation. Now, there are reports of the Tomcats tangling with the North Vietnamese MiGs and making strafing runs against the communist forces, but none that I've read have been substantiated. Regardless, Frequent Wind demonstrated the F-14's value as a fleet defense aircraft. Throughout the Cold War and into the 1990s, the Tomcat became a symbol of American military power in more ways than one. Even outside of the US, it appeared in anime such as Area 88 and Crystal Triangle, and inspired the VF-1 Valkyrie from Macross. Countless video games like Afterburner and Ace Combat featured the F-14 prominently, and oh my god, there were a lot of toys made of it. Die-cast toys, model kits, and the Sky Striker from G.I. Joe lined Sears catalogs for years. You couldn't walk into a Sears or Kmart without running into a Tomcat toy or book back in the day. Like, I cannot express to you how prevalent this thing was in both physical and visual media. This wouldn't be an F-14 video without delving into the Tomcats on the big screen. The first feature film to show off the Navy's new superfighter was The Final Countdown, released back in 1980. The movie centered around the USS Nimitz nuclear supercarrier being teleported back in time to the days leading up to December 7th, 1941. Now, the movie is really a means for the US Navy to show off all of its toys, and it's definitely worth a watch to see VF-84 Tomcats tangling with T-6 techs, A6M-0s. That's what they are. The F-14's ultimate starring role, however, came in 1986 when Paramount released the Holy Scripture, Top Gun. And what can I say? It's a perfect movie. Now, you might be thinking, oh, Falcon, that's subjective. Well, it's my show, and my opinion on Top Gun is objectively correct. Real talk, though. Never before had aerial photography captured aviation in such a visceral manner. Overall, the movie has plenty of inaccuracies for the sake of storytelling, like the Top Gun trophy being a thing, and the aircraft fly in an extremely bunched-up manner. Things like that aside, though, the movie does a really decent job of capturing what flying a Tomcat was like. And of course, we're gonna get to this part. Notably, there's a scene in the movie involving a double compressor stall resulting in Maverick's F-14 departing into a flat spin. Now, the accident featured in that film was a problem that several Tomcat crews found themselves in. Let's just have an aside and talk about some of the spin aspects of the Tomcat that everyone likes to latch onto. In my opinion, the TF-30 engines on their own get a bad rap. They were made for the F-111, which had a flight profile that was, for a lack of a better term, pretty straight and fast. In most regimes, the engines performed fine. When put into a Tomcat that was banking and skidding across the sky, however, they did have a tendency to stall when airflow was disturbed. In simple terms, a stall is when the engine chokes on an airflow disturbance. While rare, a stall can result in the engine completely shutting down or even cause damage to the internals. The problem with the TF-30s and the Tomcat is that even a minor stall can cause asymmetric thrust. The engine running well is going to push the plane faster on one side than the stalling engine. This causes a side slip, and in extreme conditions could cause the pilot to lose control. The Tomcat doesn't just get lift from its wings alone, as the fuselage itself supplies 20% of the lift. This is, again, in layman's terms, but if the Tomcat were to depart in a lateral motion, the airframe would almost act as a giant frisbee, disallowing air to flow over the flight surfaces and further choking the TF-30 engines. If the departure gets even more severe, the F-14 could fall into a flat spin, which was pretty much unrecoverable if severe enough. Part of the problem in a spin is that the crew and the nose of the airplane were outside the center of rotation, so they would be thrust forward in their restraints, and the pilot would have a hell of a time even keeping a hold of the stick, let alone stay conscious in a negative 7G situation. Throughout the Tomcat's service life, spins attributed to 40 aircraft losses. There are some online circles that suggest sweeping the wings would shift the center of gravity back and allow the nose to drop, but according to Victory 205, an actual F-14 pilot, no such techniques were ever actually employed in the fleet. So yes, flat spins in F-14s are terrifying. So terrifying, in fact, that the US Navy emphasized training pilots to recover the Tomcat before developing a flat spin. The 1992 NATOPS manual merely says the following for a fully developed flat spin below 10,000 feet. Eject. In the mid-80s, Tomcat crews had focused training on how to avoid spins altogether. When getting the Tomcat into a high angle of attack situation, it has a tendency to have adverse roll effects. In some situations, when a pilot were to, say, crank the stick to the right, the Tomcat would roll left and exacerbate an already terse flying situation. Knowing this and adding a few other tricks, Tomcat crews quickly picked up the skills needed to avoid getting into flat spins to begin with. Faults with the TF-30 aside, the F-14 was still a force to be reckoned with. In the coming months, we'll delve into some of the highlights of the F-14's career, spanning from the dogfights over the Gulf of Sidra to the bombcat strikes in Bosnia. I also hope to delve into some of the improvements to the airframe, from the addition of modern avionics to the replacement of the TF-30 with the mighty GE F-110 turbofans. Hell, some Iranian Tomcats might even make a cameo. Stay tuned and subscribe, we've got some Tomcat legends coming up, guys. Thanks again to my patrons who enabled me to keep making these videos. You guys really are awesome, and I want to make a special thanks to my Ace of Aces tier. Shoutouts to Captain Fantastic, Chuck45, Deuce, Ghoul, Iron, Jake Fuentes, Kodai, Private Petey, Aspen, Tico, Weefy, Boats FG, and Blake Storm Elite. You guys are the bomb, and keep that sun at your back.